She divorced me, took the house, the car, and the kids, then called me crying 2 years later, begging to come back when she found out what I had quietly built while she was gone. The judge looked over his glasses and asked my wife one last time if the settlement reflected her wishes. Danielle Whitmore did not even hesitate. She said yes with the kind of calm people use when they think they are closing the door on something beneath them. Then she adjusted the sleeve of her cream blazer, stared straight ahead, and let her attorney slide the papers forward like they were the conclusion to a very reasonable business transaction. I remember the exact moment, because that was the moment I understood my marriage had not ended in heartbreak. It had ended in evaluation. She had measured me, projected my future, and decided I was a poor investment. By the time we walked out of the courthouse in Greenwich, Connecticut, she had the house in Old Greenwich, the black Range Rover, primary custody of our 2 kids, and enough confidence in her decision to barely look at me while her attorney shook my hand. My son Owen was 9. My daughter Avery was 6. They were at school while their parents divided the architecture of their whole lives on polished oak tables under fluorescent lights. Danielle stopped me near the steps outside. She said, "Ethan, I know this feels brutal, but this is the cleanest way." I looked at her and said nothing. She hated silence because silence forced her to hear herself. So she kept going. She said, "You're a good man, but good doesn't always mean capable." That line stayed with me longer than the divorce itself. Not because it was cruel, because it was honest enough to reveal what she had thought about me for a very long time. I had spent 3 years building a product no one could see yet. I left a secure executive role in supply chain analytics because I believed I could build something better than the bloated software companies that kept selling half-fixes to hospitals and logistics groups. I believed I could build a system that actually predicted inventory disruption before it happened. Danielle believed I had left a powerful job to play founder in our basement while the mortgage still came every month. Those are not the same story. And in a marriage, the story that wins is usually the one with visible proof. At the time, I had none. No investors, no launch announcement, no magazine feature, no expensive office. Just a tired laptop, a rented desk in Stanford twice a week, and a conviction so quiet it looked a lot like failure. Danielle came from a family that admired certainty. Her father, Gregory Hale, had spent 30 years turning regional commercial properties into a polished East Coast empire. Her mother curated charity boards the way other people curated kitchens. They were never rude to me. They were worse. They were politely unimpressed. Even during the marriage, I could feel the temperature shift whenever someone asked how things were going with my company. If I said we were making progress, Gregory would nod the way men nod at children explaining card tricks. If I said we were still refining the model, Danielle would change the subject before anyone had to sit inside my answer. Looking back, the divorce was not sudden. It was simply the first time everyone stopped pretending to wait for me. For 6 months after the settlement, I lived in a 1-bedroom rental in Darien with furniture that arrived in boxes and a folding desk facing a wall. The kids came every other weekend at first. Danielle insisted we keep a formal schedule. She said routine mattered. What she meant was control mattered. So I built my life around whatever hours were left. I worked until 2 in the morning. I took calls from hospital administrators in different states who had no idea I was pitching from a chair with a throw blanket over the back because I could not justify buying a real office yet. I learned how to explain my software to skeptical CFOs in language they respected. I learned how to negotiate without sounding hungry. I learned how to listen when people told me what they needed and ignore what they said they wanted. That first year was not glamorous. There were no movie moments, no triumphant montages, no dramatic reveal where the people who doubted me suddenly gasped in a ballroom. There was just repetition. Call, revise, pitch, get rejected, feeks, wake up, do it again. The only people who never treated my work like a joke were my children. When Owen asked what I was making, I told him I was building a tool that helped important places avoid running out of things they needed. He said, "So, basically you stop people from panicking." I smiled and said, "That's actually not a bad way to put it." Avery once drew my laptop with cape. Under it she wrote, "Daddy's robot brain saves hospitals." I kept that drawing folded inside my notebook for nearly 2 years. Danielle, meanwhile, did not exactly disappear. She just became someone who communicated through cold practicalities and occasional accidental cruelty. If I was 5 minutes late because traffic backed up on I-95, she would text, "Please respect the schedule you agreed to." If Owen mentioned I was taking them to the science center instead of a restaurant, she would say, "That sounds more realistic for your current setup." She never yelled. That was not her style. She reduced. She translated you downward until even your efforts sounded smaller than they were. About 8 months after the divorce, a mutual friend made the mistake of telling me Danielle had been seeing someone. His name was Preston Vance. He was in private wealth management, wore navy cashmere as if his body had been invented specifically for it, and belonged to the same club Danielle once said felt aspirational when we were first married. When I heard that, I did something I'm not proud of. I sat in my car outside a grocery store parking lot and stared at nothing for almost 40 minutes. Not because she moved on. That part went expected. Because for the first time I realized she had not just left my present. She had left my future. She had chosen a replacement architecture. A cleaner man with an easier life and no invisible horizon to wait for. Let me ask you something. If the person who once promised to build a life with you decided your unfinished season was your final form, would you ever fully forget that? Or would some quiet part of you keep building just to answer the version of yourself they walked away from? I wish I could tell you I never thought about proving Danielle wrong. That would sound noble. It would also be a lie. At first, survival was my reason. Then the kids became my reason. Then discipline became its own reason. But somewhere under all of it, there was still a man who remembered standing on courthouse steps while his wife explained that being decent was not enough. And that man never forgot. Around month 14, everything changed, though not in the way people imagine. I did not suddenly become rich. I became credible. A regional hospital network in Connecticut agreed to run a 6-month pilot using my software to predict supply interruptions across 4 facilities. Their COO was a blunt woman named Marissa Cole who told me in our second meeting, "If this works even half as well as you claim, bigger players will come after you." I said, "Then I better make sure it works better than I claim." It did. By month 16, the pilot reduced emergency procurement costs by enough that the board asked for expansion terms. By month 18, a larger distribution firm wanted in. By month 19, 2 investors who had ignored me earlier asked for breakfast. I declined breakfast and sent terms instead. That was the first time in 2 years I felt the axis tilt. Not outwardly, quietly, which, as it turned out, was the way everything meaningful in my life had always happened. I moved out of the 1-bedroom rental and into a restored colonial in New Canaan with a wide backyard and a kitchen my kids immediately claimed smelled like pancakes even before I cooked anything in it. I bought a safe, understated Volvo instead of something flashy because I had no interest in performing recovery. I hired 3 people, then 7, then 11. We took a clean office space with glass walls and no-nonsense decor in Stanford. I named the company North Ledger Systems because it sounded like what I wanted my life to become. Accurate, steady, hard to manipulate. Here is the part no one saw. I still did not post about any of it. I did not put dramatic founder threads online. I did not send updates to mutual friends. I did not call Danielle. I did not ask the kids to carry news between households. I built it quietly because quiet work had saved me when performance could not. And because somewhere deep down, I wanted success to arrive at her doorstep as fact, not marketing. The midpoint came on a Thursday night in October, exactly 21 months after the divorce was finalized. Owen called me from his room at Danielle's house. His voice was low. He asked, "Dad, are you awake?" I told him I was. He said, "Mom told us not to bother you, but are you still at the same apartment?" I sat up in bed. I said, "No, buddy, I moved a while ago." There was a pause. Then he said something that changed everything. He said, "She told us you were still trying to get things together." I did not speak for a second because the sentence did not wound me the way you might think. It clarified everything. Danielle had not just left me. She had frozen me in place inside our children's minds. Not as a villain, not even as a failure, as a man permanently not yet ready. That same weekend, when the kids came over, I drove them through the stone gate into my new neighborhood. Owen leaned forward so hard his seatbelt locked. Avery asked, "Wait, this is yours." I said, "This is ours when you're here." They ran through the house like joy had been waiting under their feet the whole drive. Avery found her bedroom and burst into tears because the walls were painted the exact pale green she once pointed to in a magazine and forgot about. Owen walked straight into the small office upstairs, saw the framed sketch of my first software model, and said, "You actually did it. Kids say things adults bury." That one landed right in my chest. I actually did it. 2 weeks later, the twist arrived with teeth. Danielle requested coffee. Not through her attorney. Not through a scheduling app. Through a text message that said, "Could we talk privately sometime this week?" I almost said no. Then I said Friday at 10. We met at a place in Westport where everything was beige, expensive, and designed to make difficult conversations feel tasteful. Danielle looked thinner. Not prettier. Not tragic. Just thinner in the way people look when control has become tiring. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. Then she said, "The kids told me about your house." I nodded. She said, "And Gregory mentioned your company came up in a board conversation." I said, "That happens sometimes." She looked at me, then really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. Then she asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was astonishing. I said, "You divorced the version of me you thought was final." Her jaw tightened. She said, "That is not fair." I leaned back and said, "Danielle, fair is not really the category we built this in." That was when she told me Preston had left. Apparently, stability is attractive until complications become public. Her father's commercial group had overextended into a bad refinancing cycle. Money was tighter than appearances suggested. The house she fought to keep had become expensive in a way that no longer felt elegant. And the children, according to her, had started asking why Dad seemed happier than Mom. Do you hear the shift there? For 2 years, she had been the evaluator. Now, she was the one explaining declining conditions. That is the kind of twist real life gives you. Not fireworks. Reversal. I did not enjoy it as much as I thought I would. That surprised me. Because once someone hurts you deeply, you imagine their regret will feel like medicine. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes it just proves the wound was real. A week later, she called me crying. Not composed tears. Not strategic tears. The kind that interrupt breathing and make people sound younger than they are. I answered because the kids were with her, and I thought something had happened. She said, "I made a terrible mistake." I walked to the kitchen window and said nothing. She kept going. She said, "I thought I was choosing the safer life." Then she said the sentence I think she had been building toward from the moment she learned the truth. She said, "I didn't know what you were becoming." There it was. Not who I was. What I was becoming. The market correction of her marriage. The updated valuation. She told me she had been overwhelmed. She told me she had felt alone during those last years. She told me she thought I loved my idea more than I loved my family. She told me she missed the way I used to make coffee early on winter mornings before the kids woke up. She told me she had never stopped caring about me. Then, very quietly, like someone stepping onto ice, she asked if there was any chance we could try again. I stood there listening to the same woman who once translated me downward now, trying to revise the record while my kitchen lights reflected softly off countertops I had paid for with nights she had not believed in. And still, I need to be honest. A part of me wanted to say yes. Not because I trusted her, because memory is powerful, because history can dress itself like destiny if you are lonely enough. Because when a mother of your children cries into the phone and asks whether you can imagine a way back, some old version of your heart will always turn around when it hears its name. So I did not answer that night. I said, "I need time." Then I hung up and sat in the dark for nearly an hour. The next morning, I called my older sister, Claire Bennett, who has the rare gift of loving me without indulging me. I told her everything. She let me finish. Then she asked one question. She said, "Does she miss you? Or does she miss the safety of being attached to the man you became without her?" I hate efficient wisdom. It leaves nowhere to hide. Over the next month, Danielle tried carefully. She sent longer messages. She suggested family dinners. She apologized for specific things, which I will say mattered more than general regret. She admitted she had spoken about me to the kids, as if I were perpetually struggling. She admitted she had mistaken visible polish for actual character. She admitted she had confused patience with weakness. And for the first time in our entire relationship, she sounded less curated than true. That should have moved me more than it did. But trust is not rebuilt by the beauty of an apology. Trust is rebuilt by the history the apology has to cross. One Sunday afternoon, the kids were in the backyard at my place, chasing each other with foam gliders while Danielle stood beside me near the patio. The light was low and warm. The kind of suburban peace people assume can fix anything if they stare at it long enough. She said, "I know I don't deserve another chance." I nodded once. She said, "But I also know what we had was real." I looked at my children running in circles and said, "It was real for me." She flinched almost invisibly. Then she asked, "What changed in you?" I answered before I could soften it. I said, "I stopped confusing love with being chosen." That was the first moment I saw the full consequence of the divorce from her side. Not financial, not social, existential. She had expected my life to narrow after she left. Instead, it deepened. Not because losing her made me powerful, because losing the need to be approved by someone who misread me made me free. Let me ask you something else. When someone returns only after the value becomes visible, is that love rediscovered? Or is it recognition delayed until it becomes personally costly to ignore? A few days later, Owen asked if Mom was coming back to live with us. He asked it while helping me unload groceries, like he was asking whether we needed more orange juice. Children do that sometimes. They place enormous questions inside ordinary moments because they do not yet know how to carry them ceremonially. I put the milk in the fridge and said, "No, buddy." He looked up at me, not upset, just thoughtful. Then he said, "Okay." I asked if that was okay with him. He shrugged and said, "You're different here." That sentence mattered more than Danielle's tears. You're different here. Avery, for her part, told me that Mom cried in the laundry room sometimes when she thought no one could hear. I did not use that information against Danielle. Pain in the other parent is not a trophy for the one who stayed standing. So I made a decision that felt less dramatic than people expect from these stories. I did not take her back. I also did not punish her. I worked with my attorney to revise custody in a way that gave the kids more time with me, because by then they wanted it and my schedule finally allowed it. Danielle agreed without a fight, which told me more than any confession could. She knew the center of gravity had moved. Over the next year, we became something I would not have believed possible in those courthouse days. Not friends exactly. Not enemies anymore either. Just two people with a shared past and permanent responsibilities, trying to do less damage from this point forward. She sold the old Greenwich house eventually. She moved into a smaller place in Westport near the kids' school. She took consulting work for a nonprofit board and, to her credit, stopped building her identity around appearance. I could say I admired that. The truth is more modest. I respected the effort. As for me, North Ledger grew. Not explosively. Correctly. We expanded into 7 states. A major healthcare network signed a multi-year deal. An acquisition offer came in, and I turned it down because for the first time in my adult life, I was no longer desperate to be rescued by a number. My new house became less symbolic over time and more lived in. Soccer cleats by the mudroom. Science fair boards on the dining table. A cracked cereal bowl Avery refused to throw away. Real wealth, I learned, is not the stuff you win after someone leaves. It is the life you can finally inhabit without apologizing for it. Danielle called one last time about a year after that first crying phone call. Not to beg, not to bargain, just to thank me for not humiliating her when I easily could have. I told her humiliation would not have made our children safer. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I really did love you, Ethan." I believed her. That is what makes stories like this harder than people want. She did love me. She just loved certainty more. And when I could not offer that on her timeline, she chose what looked stable from the outside. By the time she understood the difference between visible security and actual character, the marriage she wanted back no longer existed. because the man waiting inside it no longer existed either. I did not become colder. I became clearer. There's a difference. So no, I did not let her come back. Not because revenge felt good, because peace felt better, because my children deserve at least one home where love was not conditional on performance, because I'd spent too many years asking someone to trust the parts of me that had not bloomed yet. And once those parts finally grew into something undeniable, I realized the person I most needed to prove something to had never really been Danielle. It was the version of me standing on those courthouse steps, holding his silence together with both hands, wondering if losing everything visible meant he had lost the right to believe in what no one else could see. He had not. He was just early. And sometimes being early looks exactly like being abandoned until the results arrive. If you're in that season now, I hope you hear me. Not everyone who leaves is evil. Not everyone who doubts you is malicious. Some people simply cannot love what has not become legible yet. That is painful, but it is also information. Build anyway. Build quietly if you have to. Build tired. Build unsure. Build after court dates and custody calendars and humiliating little comments disguised as realism. Build until your life stops asking for permission to matter. Because one day the phone may ring from someone who finally sees what you became. And by then, if you did the deeper work, you will not need their return to validate your rise. That is when you know you actually won. What's your personal reflection? If someone came back only after your value became visible, would you call that love, regret, or just bad timing?